Today we're going to be learning Pesachim Daf Lamed Hey. This is the Daf for Shabbat. We're going to start at the Mishnah, about 8 lines down from the top. With the following things you can make matzah for the mitzvah. On the first night of Pesach, there's a mitzvah to eat matzah. The matzah can be made with the following 5 grains, the famous, what we call the 5 grains. B'chitim, b'seorim, b'kosmin, u'v'shifon, u'v'shibolat shual. With wheat, with barley, with kusmin, that's spelt, with chiffon, rye, and with shibolat shual, with oats. Okay, Shuli wrote an article this week on our site about, in Flashback, about barley and different things about historically about barley, recommended reading for Shabbat. Okay, let me stop for a minute. Now the Mishnah comes to teach you that the question is, if of these 5 grains, they had a certain status about them, are you allowed to eat them or are you not? And this is something we've already seen in 3 different places, both in Brachot and in Eruvin and in Shabbat. Now we're going to see it also in Pesachim. The same list about all the things that you're allowed to use, and then we're going to have the list of the things you aren't allowed to use. And the whole second part of the daf is going to be a repeat sugya of things we saw before. This type of, well, we'll see, and then we'll go back and you'll remember. V'yotzim b'dmai, you can fulfill your obligation even if it's demai, which is produce that we're not sure if somebody took truma to masrot on, right? Those are the tithes. Uv'masel rishon shenitla trumato. This is of the things you're supposed to take, right? Demai is actually, I can repeat, we've talked about it before. It's produce usually that an am ha'aretz, someone who's not careful about certain laws. And one of the things they were worried that they weren't careful about was the ma'asel. So you're not sure whether the masrot were taken. Uv'masel rishon shenitla trumato. Maaser rishon is the 10th. You take, okay, and this is going to be important for the continuation. You take a 50th or 40th or a 60th of your produce for the Kohen. You can pick whether you want to be more generous, less generous, or average. You give that to the Kohen. That's called Truma Gdola. Then you take a 10th of what's left and you give that to the Levi. The Levi has to give a 10th of his produce to the Kohen also. Whatever you give him, he has to give a 10th. So Maaser Rishon is what you give to the Levi. And if it already had truma taken from it, then you can make matzah out of it. The Gemara is going to ask, obviously, that's regular, perfectly good produce once you take the truma. So what are we even talking about? Uvemaser sheni, the hekdesh sheniftu, also things that you're supposed to take the first and second and the 4th and the 5th year of the Shemitah cycle. You're supposed to take another 10th of your produce, bring it to the temple, but usually you redeemed it onto coins. So if you redeemed it onto coins, then the produce becomes regular, what we call chulin, and therefore you can also use that to fulfill your mitzvah. Likewise, anything you sanctified that you then redeemed and brought the money to the temple, but once you redeemed it, you don't even have to bring the money to the temple yet. At the moment you redeemed it, the sanctity moves to the coins, and you, therefore, the original item is now free, so to speak, and doesn't have sanctity anymore, and therefore you can use it to make matzah. The Kohen gets the challah and the truma. That's the portion that we give to the Kohen as a gift. So he can use that, or she can, right? Or she can use that if she lives in the house of the Kohen. She's married to a Kohen, or the daughter of a Kohen. They're allowed to use the challah and the truma for their matzah obligation. Aval, here comes the list of things you can't use. Lo b'tevel, not produce that truma and masrot were not taken from. And if the Levi who got his maser didn't give a 10th of his portion to the Kohen, and not the maser sheni or the sanctified items that you didn't redeem yet. Okay, now that's your classic group, right? Those are all things that are basically forbidden at this point because they have sanctity to them, so you can't use them for other things. When you bring a korban todah, Thanksgiving, a thanks offering, you bring with it 40 loaves. We've talked about this before. 10 are chametz, and the other 30 are matzah, different types. There's 3 different types, 10 each. And the rikikei nazir, so chalot are the loaves. The rikikim are wafer type things. Both the todah and the nazir have chalot and rikikim. They're different types. There's also the rivucha by the todah, which is a different type. It's unclear why they specifically, the nazir, okay, a nazir, brings 20 loaves, not 40, but 20, 10 rikikim and 10 chalot. Why the Mishnah specifically calls the Toda ones, the Chalot, Toda, and the Rikikei Nazir is not 100% clear. Most people think it could be any of the non-chametz loaves, okay, which are all for the Nazir and the 30 out of the 40 for the Toda. So if you designated these for a Korban Toda, and we're going to see exactly what it means. I shouldn't even say designate, because Rashi, if you look at Rashi, he says, Ein Yotzei Bahen. Okay, so these, I'm sorry, let me read a little more in the Mishnah, then we'll jump to Rashi. If you make these for yourself, then you can't use them for matzah. But if you made them to sell in the shuk, this is very interesting to think about. It sounds like they would make them, sell them in the shuk to people who need them for their sacrifices, and then people would buy them in the shuk, bring them to the temple and use for the sacrifices. But I always kind of imagine that the breads were made in the temple, but here you see that they weren't necessarily made in the temple. Again, it gives you a little bit of a glimpse into the reality of their day. Wait till we get to Shkalim, which is our next Masechet, and we're going to really see how the business markets work there in Jerusalem and all sorts of issues relating to the reality of the temple times and temple-related issues. Anyway, that's a sneak preview to our next Masechet. So Chalot Toda Rikikei Matzot. Let's go back to this halacha. If you make them for yourself, then you can't use them for matzah. But if you make them to sell in the shuk, then you can. So Rashi says, if you look a few lines down in Rashi, Ein Yotzei Bahen, va'afilu lo shachat hazevach alehen velo kara shem alehen. Even if you didn't yet slaughter the animal, usually they become sanctified. We talked about this in the past. When you slaughter the animal, the loaves become sanctified. Even if they weren't yet sanctified, velo kara shem alehen, and you didn't even say, these loaves are for the Toda or for the Nazir. Ela she'asa'am l'dat ken. But even if you just cook them or bake them for that purpose, that's enough to say you cannot use them for matzah. We don't yet know why. Rashi tells us, Tama mefarish b'Gemara. We're going to see the answer to this later. We're actually not going to get to it today. Tana. So now the Mishnah starts off and says, Kusmin min chitin, shibolet shu'ah v'shifon min se'orim. What does this matter? What type things are? We're basically categorizing the 5 grains into 3 categories. We have kosmin, which goes together, that's the spelt, goes together with wheat. And we have oats and rye and barley, which are all in another category. What's the purpose of these categories? So again, we look in Rashi. Rashi tells us, min chitim le'inyan truma, for truma purposes. De'ein tormin mimin al she'eno mino. This actually has nothing to do with Pesach. We're saying you can't take truma from one type on a different type. If I have lemons and oranges from my tree, and I want to take truma from the lemons for the oranges, I'm not allowed to do that. Each type is by itself, but kusmin and chitim go together, and shibolet shu'al, shifonim, and se'orim go together. Okay, those are, you can actually take some as truma on the other. Kusmin gulba, shipon dishra, shibolet shu'al, shibala ta'ala. This is just the Aramaic translation. For those living in Babylonia, it was important for them. For us, obviously, this doesn't really help us. So now the Gemara says, Hane'in orez v'dochan lo. So now it's specifically these 5 grains, which seems to imply not orez and dochan, not rice and not millet. Now, this is already, I don't know if you're thinking, but kitniot, right? Kitniot, rice. Okay, we're going to get to the whole kitniot sugya. It's a lot, well, we're going to see, but this Kitniot sugya somehow connects with this. So it tells you, orez and dochan you cannot make matzah out of. Minane mile, where do we get this from? Amal Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. V'chein tana debei Rabbi Yishmael, v'chein tana debei Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So first we quote Nemora, Rish Lakish, and then we quote, also it was said in the Tanaitic, in the Tanaim of the house of Rabbi Yishmael, and the Tanaim from the house of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, all had the same braita. Amal Ka, the pasuk says, Lo tochal alav chametz, shivat yamim tochal alav matzot. Don't eat chametz. For 7 days you should eat matzot. We've already seen this verse before. What do we learn? Tvarim, they make a connection between these 2 things. They're juxtaposed in the pasuk, in the verse, to tell you, Tvarim habaim lidei chimutz, adam yotzei bahem yedei chavato b'matzah. Yatzu elu she'em baim lidei chimutz, ela lidei tzirchon. How do we know that you're not obligated, that you can't use rice for matzah? Because it says, you can't eat chametz, you have to eat matzah. What does that teach you? That the only things that can make up matzah are things that potentially could have leavened. Therefore, right, which is interesting. You might think better to use something that doesn't leaven, but they say, no, no, no. Has to have had potential to leaven, and it didn't leaven, and that's what you use for matzah. So therefore, we're going to say that orez, rice, and millet, dochan, cannot be used as matzah because they don't actually rise, okay? The process of chimutz, of leavening, doesn't actually happen to them. Ela lidei sirchon. Okay, sirchon, it's not 100% clear what this means. Seems like they might ferment a little bit, but sirchon usually means it rots. It's not a fermenting process, and it's not like a yeast process that happens to it. It's not a leavening process. Okay, it might look like it rises a little bit, but it's not actually. Manitin de lo Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So now the Mishnah tells us, and here comes our connection to Kitniot. The Mishnah tells us our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Ta'amar orez min daganhu. He thinks that orez is a type of grain. V'chayavin al chimutzo karet, and you're chayav karet if you eat it on Pesach, which means that you're chayav for eating chametz, which means that theoretically you should be able to make matzah out of it. How do we know this? Titania, as it says in a Braita. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri oser ba'orez v'dochan mipnei shekarov lahachmitz. He says it's close to leavening. Okay, what does this mean exactly? Ibayalahu, they ask the following question. Shekarov lahachmitz dikadimu machmitz. Does it mean it hastens to rise? Maybe it doesn't go through a full process, but it does hasten and it rises quickly, and therefore it actually is chametz. Or maybe it's similar to chimutz, but it's not exactly. Okay, so that's their question. Doesn't fully rise from leaven. So they say Tashma. Let's learn from this source. Titania Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri orez min daganu v'chayavim al chimutzo karet v'adam yotzeh bo yedei chavato b'Pesach. He says explicitly, it's a type of grain. You're chayav karet, and you can be yotzeh yedei chavato b'Pesach, meaning you can make your matzah for the first night from this. What do you see from here? He must say, right, let's just read one more. V'chein haya Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri omer, karmit chayavet b'chala. Also, karmit, he thought, was another one like this. Anyway, we should really stop before we explain this. He basically says the idea is that if he says you're chayav karet, it must be really chametz, because if it wasn't really chametz, then you wouldn't be, if it didn't leaven, then you certainly wouldn't be chayav karet for it. Maybe it would be a problem, but not karet, which is the serious. So therefore we say it must be that he holds that it really does leaven. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri omer karmit chayavet b'chala. It's also chayav in chala. This is a different law about whether something is a dough. When you make a bread out of it, is a chayav in chala. And he said karmit is. We're not sure exactly what karmit is. My karmit, the Gemara asks, Amar Abai shitznita. Okay, that doesn't really help. It didn't help them either. They asked, my shitznita, what is that? Amar Papa shitznita de mishkacha bene kalniata. It's the one you find between the kalaniyot. Okay, so if you know what the kalaniyot flour, it's poppies. So it's the seeds that come out of there. Different opinions about what this is. You can look in the Korah and they have a good explanation about what they think it is. They're usually good at the botany stuff. Okay, in any case, the main important part for our purposes, and this is very interesting, is that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri holds that kitniot, right, what we call rice can actually leaven and is a problem. And Tanakama says no. So first of all, the Yerushalmi asks a good question, which is, why don't we just check and see, does it leaven or doesn't it? In other words, it's a reality question. So people explain that maybe the idea is that it's a matter that it leavens a little bit, right? It kind of, there's a certain process that happens to it. If you would let it sit for a long time in water, right, it would somewhat leaven. The question is, do we call that enough degree of leavening to call that chametz or not? And maybe that's the debate. Okay, it's unclear exactly. The main important thing is that we clearly don't hold like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. And in fact, I think it says elsewhere that we don't hold like him, and clearly the Mishnah didn't hold like him. So in fact, we all know that there's this custom of kitniot on Pesach, that most Ashkenazim do not eat kitniot on Pesach, which are all different kinds of legumes, rice being one of the main ones. And the question is why, when did this develop, what happened? So the first interesting part, I'm going to mention this first because it relates to our sugya, even though it's not really the first source about this. There's a commentary on a very famous parshan on Pesachim called Rabbeinu David. I've quoted him here and there. And he's a Sephardi commentary, and he wasn't obviously living in Ashkenazi countries. And he heard about the minhag of the Ashkenazi. They weren't eating kitniot, which is a minhag that seemed to have developed sometime in the late 1200s. And he says, this minhag is clearly a minhag ta'ut. It's a mistaken minhag, because they obviously must have thought the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and clearly the halacha is not like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. And what did he do? He saw this custom. He heard about it. He said, the only thing I can think about is Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So he assumed that must be why they do it. And therefore it's a mistake. And any mistake in minhag, you can just easily get rid of. However, when you look at the Ashkenazi sources, you have a bit of a different story. So again, this is the type of custom that developed. We don't know when exactly, but we know the first record of it is at the late 1200s, when they start to talk about the fact that there's this minhag. And then they start to quote, well, they try to give reasons as to why they think the custom developed, the people stop eating kitniot. And then it's all conjecture, because we don't have the first person who said, let's stop eating kitniot because X and Y. We just have the people stopped eating it. And then we have people responding and saying, why not? And they give all sorts of reasons, which are not, no Ashkenazi posek says, oh, it's because we hold like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Only the Sephardi, who heard about it from a distance, heard about it and assumed, oh, it must be that, because I never heard anything like this. But the Ashkenazim themselves seem to have different reasons, whether it's that the grains get mixed up, whether it's that you make bread out of it, and because you make bread, it kind of sounds like bread and, flour, wheat, and we're worried people might confuse rice flour with wheat flour. All sorts of different answers given, but maybe there really was a basis as to why they started this custom. And then what happened is the custom spread and it became very popular. And once something becomes very popular, when you take something, this is something we're going to see in the fourth parak when we start learning about makom shenahagu, where if there's a place where they do things in a particular way and they forbid things that are really allowed, permitted, you can't just say, oh, forget it, we don't need this custom anymore. It's very difficult to undo a custom that becomes very prevalent. So that's the issue with kitniot. Many nowadays try to repeal the Kitniot decree. It's not, like I said, it's not so simple. However, right nowadays that so many Ashkenazim and Sephardim have so much interaction and much more to do with each other than they used to, there's more of a push, certainly in Israel, to get rid of Kitniot. But Kitniot is still here and probably will be for a long time. Okay, moving on in the Gemara, I couldn't help myself but go into that. There's a lot more interesting things to say about that minhag. There was famous stories when there was a drought. There's an article, I remember reading an article called The War of the Legumes. There's a whole big controversy between, I don't remember all the details, but there were issues between different denominations in Judaism also over this issue throughout the generations. I think there was something in the late 1700s. Anyway, there's a lot of interesting things to be read about this. Amar Rabba bar bar Chana Marish Lakish. Now we're moving on to another interesting topic, which we'll deal with more in tomorrow's shiur, which is matzah ashira, which is egg matzah. Okay, isa sheni losha, they don't call it egg matzah here, but it's a dough that was kneaded with yayin v'shemen udvash, with wine or oil or honey, meaning it's not just water and flour. You're not chayav karet for it. That's what Rish Lakish says. Now we get a bit of a story. Yativ Rav Papa v'Rav Huna b'reit Rav Yoshua kamed Rav Idi bar Avin. So Rav Papa and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, were sitting in front of Rav Idi bar Avin. V'yativ Rav Idi bar Avin v'kamanamnim. Rav Idi bar Avin falls asleep. Okay. This reminds me when I was in high school, I had a great Gemara teacher, Rabbi Harari, who very much inspired me to love Gemara. And next to our classroom, when I was in 9th and 10th grade, there was another classroom with a very elderly teacher who often fell asleep in the middle of class. We always started the day with Gemara. I was in Flatbush, and we'd start our day with Gemara, and their class, he always fell asleep in the middle of class. Rabbi Harari was young. He never fell asleep in class, but this elderly rabbi would always fall asleep. And now, what would happen when the rabbi falls asleep? What do you assume, right? The kids celebrate, right? They have a party, they do their own thing. They're all excited. The teacher fell asleep, right? We were always studying and they were sitting doing their own thing because the teacher was sleeping. So now let's see what happens when this rabbi goes to sleep. These rabbis didn't exactly have the same reaction as the kids in my high school did. Amalei Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yoshua the Rav Papa. So Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yoshua says to Rav Papa, my time at the Rish Lakish, what's his reason? Amalei, right? They start discussing the sugya they were learning. So he says, what's his reason? So Amalei, he says to him, right? The Rav Papa answers, Damalcha lo tochal alav chametz, right? Remember that pasuk we just quoted, don't eat chametz on Pesach. Dvarim she'ata yotze bahem yedei chavato b'matzah chayavim al chimutzo karet. Now, before we said, you can only be obligated in matzah, fulfill your obligation in matzah, if you don't eat chametz, right? If that item could become chametz. Now he's darshaning it the other way. He says Rish Lakish must learn like this: that that things that you can use for matzah on Seder night, those are things that you're obligated also karet if you eat them if they become chametz. So here he says, what does it mean matzah ashira? Rich man's bread. This is a rich man's matzah because it's not made with just flour and water. What does the Torah say? Seder night, you definitely need lechem oni. They call it poor man's bread to remember the way they were in Egypt. So since Adam Yotzei bo yedei chovata, because it's matzah ashira, therefore, and it's ein Adam Yotzei, you can't use this for a Seder night, therefore, so if you eat matzah shira, that you're not going to be obligated. If it leavens, you won't be obligated karet for it. So Eitive Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yoshua the Rav Papa, he questions him and he says, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Himchau ugmao. What if I had something baked and I put it in water and I soaked it in water and it disintegrated in the water? Im chametzu anush karet. If I ate that, okay, what does this make me think about? When I was little, I used to take the challah, I would make a little ball out of it, like smush it together, and I put it in my soup. It was like a delicacy in our house. You know, the kids would love to do that. Once I was at a friend's house and her parents looked at me like I was crazy. They said, we don't do this in our house. But my house, it was totally acceptable. And we would make these challah balls and stick them in our soup. Now, what do you think about that? Is that you obligated on Pesach for eating that? Of course, right? So im chametzu anush karet. But im matzahu ein adam yotzei yedei chovato b'Pesach. But if it were matzah and you'd soak it in the soup and you'd eat it for your obligation Seder night, you would definitely not fulfill your obligation. So he says that drasha that you tried to say Rish Lakish is saying, which would prove to us that matzah shira, you wouldn't be chayav karet, doesn't make any sense, because here's something that you're not obligated matzah, but you definitely be obligated karet if it was chametz on Pesach that you stuck in your soup. This is a classic case where, right, it disproves your rule. Okay, you wouldn't be obligated matzah, but you would be getting karet for eating it if it became chametz. So the whole issue of matzah shira is another debate between Sephardim and Ashkenazim. We're going to talk about it in tomorrow's sugya, right? Can you eat it on Pesach or not? We'll get to it. Sorry, I skipped. Okay, in the meantime, so this is what they did while their rabbi was sleeping, right? They end up with this halachic discussion. One asks a question of the other. Rav Papa answers. Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yoshua says, what are you talking about? It doesn't make sense. I'll disprove you. In the meantime, Itar Bahu Rav Idi Bar Avin. So the teacher wakes up. Amar Lahu Dardike says to him, children, Hainu Tamid de Rish Lakish, you got it all wrong. This is Rish Lakish's reasoning. Okay, now, this reminds me of another thing. My grandfather used to fall asleep at the table and then he would say, I heard every word, right? So that's what basically this teacher, he seemed to have been hearing what was going on. And he says, oh, you're struggling with finding out Rish Lakish? I'll tell you why. It's not for the reason you said. It's mishum dahavalahu mei perot. Umei perot emach mitzim. And this is why some people think that matzah shira is okay. Because he says anything made from fruit juice is not going to leaven. Okay, it can never leaven. And that's why you're not chayav al chimutzo karet. Right? You're not going to get karet if you eat a dough that was made with fruit juices, because it will never rise properly. Okay, moving on. So that's the end of our sugya. Like I said, matzah shira, we're going to get back to in tomorrow's sugya, because I don't want to talk about it till we see the other sugya about it. Now we're going to go through, and this is a total repeat sugya almost until the end of the daf, of something we saw, like I said, in Shabbat, in Brachot, and in Eruvin, okay, about the Demai, the Maser, all these things. And they always ask the same slew of questions every time we have this list in the Mishnah. Yotzei b'Demai u'b'Maser. So Dmai, halo chazele. What do you mean Dmai? You can't eat that Dmai. It's maybe it's safek tevel. Maybe someone didn't take the truma to masrot from it, or really the masrot is what we're worried about, because we assume they did take truma. Wait, you could just renounce all your property, turn yourself into a poor person, and a poor person is allowed to eat demai. So therefore, hashanami chazele. So therefore, it must be. We're going to say that you can use this for matzah, since theoretically you could turn yourself into a poor person, and a poor person could eat demai. So obviously, we can use this for matzah. How do we know that a poor person can eat demai? We learned this already, right? It says in the Mishnah, you feed the poor people with demai. Okay, we don't make them have to take extra stuff if there's only a doubt about whether it was tithed or not. And the achsanya also. That's either a guest. Usually it means the soldiers. Okay, special dispensation for soldiers. Right? Achsanya usually means guests. Here it means soldiers. But Amar Rav Huna, and Rav Huna, every time we quote this, we point this out, that it's actually machloka Beit Shammai Beit Hillel. Tana Beit Shammai omrim ein machilim et aniyim d'mai ve'et achsanya d'mai. He doesn't think you can do this. But Beit Hillel omrim machilim, but Beit Hillel permitted. Next case, Maaser Rishon shenitla trumato. So the Gemara says, Pshita, kevan nitla trumato chulin have. Once you take the truma from it, of course it's fine. That's classic chulin. You've already dealt with what you're supposed to do. So the answer, lo tzricha shikdimo b'shibolin. Remember the stages where you have make a pie. First, you put it in bundles after you cut it, right? After you harvest it, you roll it into bundles. Then you put all the bundles in a pile, and then you flatten the pile. You're obligated in the maaser from the time of the flattening of the pile. So what if before, when it was just in bundles, before you took the truma gedolah, the first thing you're supposed to take for the kohen, nitla himenu trumat maaser v'lo nitla himenu trumat gedolah. Sorry, I read it before, but let me say it again. Hikdimo b'shibolim. What happens is the Levi takes his 10th before you took the part for the Kohen. So now the Levi has produce that you didn't take the truma from. He's supposed to give his own truma. He's supposed to give a 10th to the Kohen. So what happens? Before you were able to take truma, and before was even obligated in truma, he takes his 10th, and then nitlayim and trumat maser, he gives the 10th of that to the Kohen. But that never had truma gedolah taken from it. So the question is, right, can you use this? Because really it's not fully fixed, because he didn't take the 140th or the 150th or the 160th from his portion that I was supposed to have given, right? It was my produce. I give it to the Levi. That portion never had truma gedolah taken from it. On the other hand, it also never was obligated in truma gedolah because he took it before the obligation kicked in. So they say that is okay. According to Rabbi Yavau's opinion, Amar Rabbi Yavau, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Maaser Rishon, Shikdimo b'shibolim, Patur mitruma gedolah, the Maaser Rishon, that you go early and you take, the Levi takes his portion first, is exempt from truma gedolah. How do we know this? Shenema v'arimot mimenu trumat Hashem maaser min maaser. Says you're supposed to take the 10th of the 10th that you get. That's for the Levi. What are they darshan from this? Maaser min maaser amarti lecha. Only maaser from the maaser. V'lo truma gedolah trumat maaser min maaser. You only have to take the trumat maaser. You don't have to take two trumot. You don't have to take also truma gedolah and also trumat maaser. So if for some reason you got it in an early stage and the truma gedolah wasn't taken, if you're a Levi, you don't have to take also the truma gedolah from it. So hope I didn't say trumat maaser. The trumat maaser, you have to take the truma gedolah now. What they're saying is this pasuk is limiting. It's saying maaser min maaser, only maaser min maaser, a 10th, which is the trumat maaser, but not the truma gedolah, which is the 150th. Amar le Rav Papa l'Abaye. Papa says, but wait, according to what you're saying. Okay, so just so you understand, when the Mishnah said you can make matzah out of maaser rishon shenitlat trumato, it means maaser rishon you gave that the Levi took at an early stage, and truma gedolah was never taken, but he took the 10th of it he was supposed to give to the Kohen, just the 150th didn't get taken. So Rav Papa says, if you're going to say the pasuk limits and says only one truma he has to take, so even in a later stage, if they already made the pile and he took the truma, the maaser, and then took his own truma for the Kohen, but the truma gedolah was never taken, it sounds like it should also be okay. So Amarle, Rabbi says to him, what do you mean? Alech Amarcha, there's a different verse, which is expansive. It says, from all your gifts, you should take all the truma of Hashem. So now, what did they darshan here? Kol trumat Hashem, all the truma. So they say that means inclusive, more things, even both trumot sometimes you have to take. So now they say umara'ita. So why specifically at the earlier stage when it's in the shibolim and the bundles, we say you're not obligated to take both. But when it's read, it seems they're claiming, even though it's really not arbitrary, but they're suggesting maybe it's a little arbitrary, but the Kri, no, and we have one pasuk that limits, one that expands. Why do we assume it's limiting in the shibolim case and it's expanding in the Kri case? Why don't you say the opposite? So they say, obviously, hai idgan, hai lo idgan. One already became a pile and it's called the grain at that point when you put them in the pile. Therefore, you're going to be obligated to take the truma also. But one that was at the earlier stage before the obligation even hit, of course you're not going to, right? That's the one we're going to be more lenient about. Next case, Maser Sheni v'Hekdesh sheniftu. Pshita, obviously Maser Sheni and Hekdesh that were redeemed, you should be, or they're redeemed, they're chulin. So the answer, Hacha, it must be a unique case, right? A lot of these we're giving unique cases. Just like we had the other day, where you have to add a fifth if you eat truma that's not yours or you do me'ila. Also here, you have to, when you redeem onto a coin, you have to add an extra fifth. Let's say you only added the value of a coin, took the value exactly of the fruits, and you didn't add the extra fifth. By the way, it's only an obligation if you redeem your own fruits, not if you redeem someone else's. That's what it's saying. If you did your Maser Sheni or your Hekdesh and you redeemed it without adding the fifth, that's considered redeemed, and therefore you can make matzah out of it. Because the extra fifth is not make or break, okay? It doesn't ruin it means your pidyon was done, you still just owe a fifth. So pshita, obviously, kohanim can eat challah and truma, that's their food. So ma'u detema matzah shaveh l'chol adam be'ina. You might have thought, this is, by the way, this didn't appear in the other sugyot, it's specific to matzah. You might have thought you need matzah that everyone equally can eat. Kamash malam matzot matzot riba. Because the pasuk says matzot, matzot, okay, this seems to be, it appears, I think I saw maybe in 17 different places the word matzot appears. We're not sure which one it's referencing, but maybe they're saying the fact that the Torah uses all the time, it speaks in plural form, it means it includes all kinds of matzah, meaning even matzah that's only for a kohen and other people can't eat it. I was thinking maybe this has to do with lechem oni. Everyone was kind of together. They were all in the same similar situation. So people shouldn't be in maybe that's the thinking that maybe matzah has to be something that's equal to everybody, right? That we're all free on that night. We're all the same status. But in the end, it's not true. The kohen can make it from truma or challah. Now we start to get to avaloba tevel. Now we get to the list of which ones you can't make matzah from. So not tevel. So the Gemara says that that's something you didn't take the trumot and masrot from. That's forbidden to eat. So the Gemara says, pshita, obviously you can't use for matzah. You can't do anything with it. Gemara answers, if you plant something in a planter, which doesn't have a hole at the bottom and doesn't get any nourishment from the ground, you might have thought, right, that's a case where you're not obligated in trumot and masrot on a deoraita level, on a Torah level, only rabbinic. And therefore you might have thought, maybe since it's only tevel from a rabbinic law perspective, maybe you could use it for matzah on Pesach, and it's coming to tell you, no, you can't. And if you have maser rishon and you didn't take out truma, then that's a problem. So now, this is the Levi didn't take his truma for the Kohen. So the Gemara says, pshita, obviously, if you didn't take truma, you're not allowed to eat it. Of course, you can't use it for matzah. Again, it's where you first you already did the pile. This is the other case. You already did the pile. And then when it's coming to tell you, right, you took the truma maaser for the kohen, but you didn't do the truma gedolah. You took your portion before I separated. Again, I'm supposed to take truma gedolah first, but I didn't. You already, as a Levi, took your portion, gave your 10th to the kohen, but the 1/50th was never taken from that produce. So ma'u detema. So now they say, what do you mean? It's still obvious, right? But they say, ma'u detema k'd amar le Rav Papa l'Abaye. You might have thought, like Rav Papa questioned Abaye and said, maybe this also, because of the limitation in the first verse, maybe it's also limiting and saying you only take one mas truma and you don't have to take two. So kamash malan kedishanele. It's coming to teach you, no. it's the way he concluded in the end that Abaye said, no, you really are obligated to take Truma Gdola in that case. What if you have Maser Sheni or Hekdesh that weren't redeemed? So again, Pshita, isn't that obvious? So again, they're going to say it's a specific case. Lo'olam diniftu, it really was redeemed. Well, that's a little strange. It just said it wasn't redeemed. Umay lo niftu, shelo niftu kil chatan. They weren't redeemed in a halachically correct manner. What is that? Maser Sheni shepto al gav asimon. Okay, an asimon is a blank coin. It's one without any form on it, right? Most of our coins have some sort of engraving on it. So, right, the asimon is the coins they used to use in Israel for the phones, the telephones in the olden days. And those they weren't coins with any sort of etching on them. So if you do it al gabe asimon, so that would be an incorrect kind of pidyon. Okay, it wouldn't work. It's ineffective. Why? And that's what we would say, shalom ifdu. It was redeemed, but it was redeemed incorrectly. The pasuk says bitzarta kesef, which really means you should bind the money that you take and bring it to Jerusalem. Right, this is when you redeem them. But they derive from here davar sheyesh lo tzura. Has to be something that has a tzura, a shape, a form on it, like a coin. The hekdesh shechililog. And what about hekdesh? So they're going to say, what's a case where you redeemed hekdesh incorrectly? Shechililog abe karka, that you redeemed it instead of onto money, you did it onto land. This actually isn't a real verse, okay? This happens once in a while where they quote something as if it's a pasuk and it's not, okay? Maybe there's a mistake somewhere down the road. But Rashi says maybe it's a pasuk. Rashi says, about 8 lines from the bottom of Rashi, it's where you sanctify a field, and then you add a fifth of the money. Right? The point being here, the money, kesef. It has to be money, not land. Why? Because land fluctuates in price all the time. You need something that's more stable, even though currencies aren't always so stable, but more stable. Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, last thing for today, we're going to quote a Braita, and we're going to start. You might have thought you can fulfill your obligation to eat matzah with tevel that's not fixed. Right? Usually fixed means you take the truma and maschal. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, before we continue with this Braita, something doesn't make sense. Kol tevel nami haloni taken. First of all, any tevel is not fixed. So what do you mean tevel that is not fixed? All tevel is not fixed until you fix it, and then it's not called tevel anymore. Ela betevel shaloni takan kol tzorko means, you might have thought you could be yotze matzah from tevel that's partially, it's a little bit not fixed. What would that mean? You took the truma gdola, but you didn't take the truma on the maaser. Or maaser rishon v'lo maaser sheni. You took the first maaser that you give to the Levi, but you didn't take the maaser sheni, which you're supposed to eat in Jerusalem, right? You didn't separate it out. V'afilu maaser ani, or you didn't give the maaser ani, which is what you give in lieu of the maaser sheni in years number 3 and 6. You give to the poor people. So you didn't do one of the stages of the maaser. So how do we know, Mina? And we're back to the Braita now. How do we know that you're not going to fulfill your obligation for matzah with this? Talmud Lomar lo tochal alav chametz. What are they darshan? Mishi isuro mishum bal tochal alav chametz. It's only something that would have been forbidden because of don't eat chametz. Yatsa zeh she'en isuro mishum bal tochal chametz ela mishum bal tochal tevel. They say this item, if it were chametz, it would only be obligated because of tevel, because you didn't take the truma maschot, and it wouldn't be obligated because of chametz. So the Gemara asks, what do you mean? Where did that isur of chametz go? If it's chametz and it's tevel, just because it's tevel doesn't mean it's not forbidden mishum chametz. It's still chametz. What, just disappears the whole chametz thing? And that's what they want to say is, since it can't become chametz, then it also can't be used to make your matzah, like we saw in the beginning of the daf. So Amar Rav Sheshet Hamane Rabbi Shimon this must hold like Rabbi Shimon de Amar Ein Isur Halal Isur. What does that mean? That means once you have this very famous approach, we're going to learn more about it. We'll see. We're going to quote it in the next line. We're going to start this already tomorrow. Ein Isur Halal Isur means if something's forbidden for one reason, and then later it becomes forbidden for a different reason. This first was tevel. It was produce. It hadn't yet leavened. Then you didn't take truma maschot, and then it leavened and it became chametz. Now, first it was tevel, then it was chametz. Once it's already forbidden because of tevel, you don't add another isur of it being chametz. Okay, and therefore they say that this must go according to Rabbi Shimon, who holds Ein isur halal isur. Once something's forbidden one thing, you can't add on another isur. The next thing you'll see is going to be talking about eating a nevela on Yom Kippur. It's already asur because it's nevela, and now it's additionally forbidden because it's Yom Kippur. That we're going to end for today, and Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov, and we'll pick up on Sunday. Bye. Litro.